Okay, we're ready to start. I'd like to welcome everyone to Aiken. I'm Larry Powell, Chairman of the Nuclear Materials Committee, and members of the Nuclear Materials Committee are Don Gillis, Vice Chair, Gil Allensworth, Susan Corbett, Tom French, David Howell, Doug Howard, Dan Kaminsky, John McMichael, Earl Shepard, Nina Spinelli, and Mary Weber. Do we have anyone on the phone that's attending the meeting by phone? Okay, I guess not. I'd like to stress to everyone that the meeting's being recorded live and to please state your name and affiliation before speaking. Speak loudly and clearly. Also be warned that mics pick up idle chatter. We want to keep the agenda topics during the meeting. There will be public comment periods where other comments can be heard. We would like to keep these comments to comments and not questions to the board if we could. We will consider taking some comments during our draft recommendation, but I'm going to have to kind of keep a tight rein on the length of time that's spent because we only have a short amount of time to get our business dealt with, and so we just can't spend a lot of time on public comments during the draft recommendations. At the end of the at 8:05 to 8:20, we have a period of time set aside for public comments, and we'd like to keep as many of the comments at that time as possible. There is no public comment sign-in sheet for comments. The Nuclear Materials Committee has 3 draft recommendations and 1 open recommendation. Recommendation number 334, Nuclear Materials Operations Review, is the open. At this point, I'd like to present Maxine Maxted, our DOE contact, if she can give us a point of contact status update.
Thank you, Larry. So all nuclear materials facilities are in sustained operations. H Canyon continues to process spent nuclear fuel with 60 bundles processed in this fiscal year and 180 bundles since the beginning of the campaign. The target residue material processing campaign is ongoing. H Canyon declared a potential inadequacy in the safety analysis, which we call a PISA, on May 23, 2018, regarding a non-conservative assumption for the beginning value of the composite lower flammability limit within the dissolvers. All operations were stopped until the situation could be analyzed. A standard beginning assumption for all vessels within H Canyon was used in the calculation, but did not account for the chemical reaction occurring within the dissolvers. The calculation has been corrected, and at no time was safety jeopardized because the operating procedures and surveillance requirements established purges of the tanks more frequently than the calculated time using the correct assumption needed. HB line continues to process plutonium feed material for disposition. K-Area continues to conduct destructive examinations of 3013 containers as part of the surveillance program for long-term storage of plutonium. L-Area continues to support fuel receipts from foreign and domestic research reactors and transfers of spent nuclear fuel to H Canyon for processing. 235F continues to work removal of materials at risk and address actions for completion of the implementation plan for DNFSB, which is Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, recommendation 2012-1. SRNL is an active participant in the Small Business Venture Pilot Program. They're working with the Hawaii hydrogen carriers in the development of a low-pressure hydrogen storage system to assist small businesses in bringing next-generation clean energy technologies to the marketplace. In addition, SRNL, in conjunction with Augusta University, licensed its glass microsphere technology for medical applications, using the microspheres as carriers for biomolecules and localized injections of medications for treatment. And as was requested by the CAB committee, Status on potential processing of SNF beyond the current AROD amounts, which is the amended record of decision. A briefing was conducted for headquarters back in January, which discussed the potential for the processing of additional aluminum-based fuel beyond the amended record of decision amounts. The information was well received, but no actions will be taken until the new administration has been briefed and staffed key positions in EM. We don't know when that's going to happen. Status of disposition for non-aluminum based SNF. This was included in the briefing package for headquarters, along with the aluminum-based fuel. Again, actions will have to wait until the new administration and their key personnel are in place. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxine. Any discussion from the committee on Maxine's? David?
David Hoyle, CAB. I read in the newspaper about an HEU shipment from Scotland. Can you say anything about that?
I know nothing about a shipment from Doonray, I believe you're speaking
Right.
of. That's not an EM activity. I believe it's an NNSA, but it did not come to the Savannah River site. You'll have to talk to NNSA. We do not have any knowledge on that.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Talk too fast, Karen. I'm sorry. You get nervous.
Okay, on our draft recommendation for proposed consolidated interim storage of spent nuclear fuel and high-level nuclear waste at SRS. David, that's your recommendation. Would you like to present that for us, please?
Yes, be happy to. Back in 2013, the Citizens Advisory Board passed a position statement basically along these very lines, opposing consolidated interim storage of spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste at SRS. At the time, our guidelines dictated that position statements would expire in 1 year, and so that position statement was renewed by the CAB every year since then, including this past year. However, in the past year, the CAB has changed its operating procedures such that position statements are no longer allowed. We only make recommendations. And this position statement would expire in July of this year. So I'm proposing to convert the position statement to a recommendation, which is allowed by our operating procedures. And it essentially says exactly the same thing as the old position statement did, but it makes a recommendation. If you'll allow me, I'll just whip through this.
Go ahead.
The background is the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, created in 1982, created a timeline for the creation of a deep geologic repository for the disposal of spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste, including such waste at Savannah River site. The permanent repository was slated by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act to begin receiving commercial and defense wastes by the middle of the next decade, which would have been 1995. After over 2 decades of site studies, DOE filed a construction license application with NRC in 2008. However, in 2009, the President determined the proposed location was not a workable option and tasked a Blue Ribbon Commission to find alternatives. The Blue Ribbon Commission issued its final report in 2012 and included among its recommendations to 1. Develop 1 or more consolidated interim storage facilities, and 2. Provide for the siting and development of 1 or more deep geologic disposal facilities. In December of 2015, DOE formally initiated a siting process for storing and disposing of America's nuclear wastes, and then President Obama tasked DOE with establishing a separate disposal site for defense wastes. DOE is also planning to research the potential of deep borehole disposal. The current Trump administration has indicated the desire to restart the Yucca Mountain licensing process. Discussion. In 2013, DOE response to the BRAC recommendation states that over the next 10 years it plans to implement a program to make a disposal site available, quote, by 2048, over 50 years after the date intended by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. DOE's poor track record in managing large capital projects indicates the likelihood that this estimate will only elongate. Even finishing the Yucca Mountain project would entail decades. In the meantime, DOE plans to establish consolidated interim storage sites for spent nuclear fuel and/or high-level waste. Because of existing SRS storage, DOE may consider Savannah River Site a suitable eastern consolidated interim storage alternative, despite its close proximity to water and population centers. Establishment of consolidated interim storage locations will likely have the unintended consequence of reducing motivation to create a permanent repository, thereby dramatically extending the period of interim storage at the consolidation sites. The conclusions are that A, establishment of a permanent geologic location for spent nuclear fuel and/or high-level waste is at best decades away. B, creation of consolidated interim storage sites will be extremely costly and would reduce the motivation to create a permanent repository. Pending establishment of repositories, DOE may consider the Savannah River Site a suitable alternative for consolidated interim storage of spent nuclear fuel and/or high-level radioactive waste. Continued disposition of surplus nuclear material will continue to add to SRS's long-term waste storage liability. And E, SRS has not been adequately evaluated under the National Environmental Policy Act for storage of spent nuclear fuel and/or high-level waste for the long time period likely to occur under DOE's current strategy. Based on the foregoing, the Savannah River Site Citizens Nuclear Advisory Board recommends that 1, not consider SRS as a reasonable consolidated interim storage location for spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste pending establishment of a permanent geologic repository. And 2, stabilize and remove such waste from SRS as soon as possible. I welcome any discussion.
Any discussion from the board? Dawn?
Make me discuss this. Dawn Gillis, Cab. First, I have a question for DOE. If this were to happen, would this be an EM decision?
Maxine Maxted, no. The repository is under nuclear energy as far as I know right now. It's not an EM decision.
And that's why this was a position paper, not a recommendation before. So we can't make recommendations on things that are not EM responsibilities. So whether I agree with the recommendation or not at this point is irrelevant, but I just think that it's not an EM decision.
Well, even if the defense wastes are stored here and in interim storage capacity, it would remain here at Savannah River Site until geologic repository is available.
Well, I'm all about getting our waste off the site. Our current fuel and the bits and pieces that are still coming that will end up. That was one of the questions I was going to ask. Are we processing faster now than we are receiving at this particular point in time? I mean, you receive like 5 shipments, but you've taken over.
Like, I don't think I can adequately answer that right now. I don't think it's a 1-for-1 type of situation, 1 in, 1 out. It's not like that.
No, I'm just kind of trying to get a feel for. We're processing, and as long as we continue with processing, so, no major faux pas happen, and we keep processing, the current rate of processing of the fuel we've got, the aluminum fuel we have, is faster than our current plan for receipts of fuels.
So the whole intent behind the AROD campaign was to allow us to make space for any fuel that would be coming in. So that was our intent with the whole...
The beginning of the processing, but that doesn't mean that we're going to stop processing.
We
Whether
have
people-
approval to process up
Yeah.
to 1,000 bundles of
1,000.
the MTR fuel, material test reactor fuel.
Well, that's kind of a side point anyway, but, as far as commercial fuels, this interim thing is mostly for commercial fuel. I don't know of non-commercial fuel that would come here, that would come to any interim storage, wherever the defense fuels are more likely to stay where they currently are. The interim storage, from what I understand, is mostly for commercial fuels, to get them out of all these old commercial storage facilities. But that's what I'm talking about mostly. So the decision to put an interim storage facility anywhere is not an EM decision, is my point, whether it's here or anywhere else.
Yes, but it would include the EM stored fuel.
Susan?
Susan Corbett, Cab. So if this is not in our purview, then my question to the DOE is, what will be the public forum, the public process that you will adapt to allow the citizens of this state to have input into this decision? If the cab is not, if this is not, if we don't get to weigh in on this, then when do the citizens get to be part of the
So-
process?
Maxine Maxted, DOE. I know that there was a group that was looking for public comment on the consent process through nuclear energy, and there was public comment periods. I don't know the status of those, if they're still open or not, but there have been public comment periods on the whole consent-based process and siting.
And that's for the interim storage, not just
the Yes.
disposal facility.
Correct.
Okay. And also keep in mind that this proposed recommendation has to go before the entire board and has to be voted on by the board, and we can weigh in as to whether or not it's in our purview or not at that time too. I would recommend that we go ahead and consider this for a recommendation, and if the full board decides that it's not in our purview, we could cross that bridge when we get to it.
A second, taking it to the full board, not that we need a second, but.
So, I mean, are there any other comments on it before we vote, David?
I just wanted to point out that this particular proposal, as well as the other draft proposal that I'll be presenting on German foreign research reactor fuel, has generated a great deal of public interest, apparently, because the SRS CAB support team has received no less than, well, I counted 39, including one that was handed to me today, 39 emails or letters received from the public, virtually all of them supporting this recommendation. If you'll allow me, I'll just summarize some of the statements in them. I won't read them all. There's 39 of them. But hopefully all of the CAB members, if should this go to the full board, should get a copy of these. Laura Welsh Davidson said, "Please do not allow the dumping, storing of spent nuclear waste in our precious state to seal our fate as a dumping ground." Sheila Owen, "Please do not allow SRS to become a permanent waste storage facility." D. Reynolds, "Please, no more nuclear waste storage at South Carolina. No more nuclear waste. I strongly oppose using South Carolina as temporary storage for high-level nuclear waste from commercial power plants. South Carolina is heavily populated and the soil around Savannah River site is pervious sand." We are very much against any more so-called temporary storage of high-level radioactive waste from commercial power plants being dumped in our backyards at the Savannah River site. Yucca Mountain is a good place to do this. I would say that half of these comments also included a statement about the German fuel. There were some interesting ones. Well, actually, they're all very interesting, but we even got some from children. My name is Maxine. Not you, I presume. My name is Maxine. I'm 9 years old. I live in Graniteville, South Carolina. I wish you would not decide to bring nuclear waste right to my doorstep. My name is Clara. I live in Graniteville. I'm 11 years old. Storing nuclear waste in Aiken could harm me greatly. I don't want it brought to my home, and many others agree with me. Pretty much in the same vein throughout all of these. I wish I could read them all, but I'd rather give time for people to speak, as we have quite a few here tonight. But I did want to share those with you.
Okay, go ahead, Susan.
So if, Susan Corbett, so if the waste, if we did become some sort of temporary dumping site for this until such permanent repository, then would it fall under our purview once it was here?
I can't answer that. Maxine, can you?
Michael Michelanis, Department of
Michael.
Energy. First of all, there's no such program proposed within the environmental management. If such a program became part of EM scope, then it would fall under your purview. If another office within the Department of Energy did it, no. This is a site-specific advisory board for EM work only.
Larry, I just had a point of information about the potentially viable storage and reprocessing option that's out there.
Can you make it quick, Tom?
Yeah, I would. I'll
Come
make
to
it
the
very quick.
microphone.
Just a point of information, Tom Clement. Since you voted on that position statement last year, the one thing that has come forward about storage here or near Savannah River site over at the Barnwell site is from the spent fuel reprocessing group. And several of the groups that are represented here put out a news release against it. But this was dated July 26, 2016, when they informed the NRC that they're looking at build a storage facility designed for spent nuclear fuel. And then the letter goes on to say that basically they want to reuse the remaining fuel to reprocess it for other reactors. So if that were to come here, there is a large waste stream that potentially could be an EM issue if SRS was involved in this. But there is an active thing on the table, and this guy was interviewed for Las Vegas television when they came here about a month ago, saying he still wants to bring spent fuel here and wants to reprocess it. So there is an active, though I don't think it's credible, proposal that's out there. So I don't think you're out of your purview, because if it involves reprocessing, that's a tremendous amount of waste that potentially could fall to EM if it were on Savannah River site. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Well, I think we should go ahead and vote on whether or not this recommendation should be taken to the full board and voted on. Is there a...
Chair, are you going to have any public comment before you vote?
Well, we can have public comment before we vote if you'd like it, but there again, can we keep it quick and simple? Rose Hayes.
Good evening. I'm never quick and I'm never simple. There's been a lot of confusion over what can go where from this site, so I did some research. And I will give you this written statement for the record. Over the years, I have on several occasions pointed out that the Savannah River site has never been studied, tested, or certified as a permanent storage site for nuclear waste. The history of SRS nuclear waste storage strongly indicates that, in fact, it is regarded by the United States government as a permanent repository for such material. Some radiological materials have been stored at SRS for over a half-century. The term temporary storage is often used to explain the tenure of such material at the site, but it is illogical and indefensible to refer to a half-century as a temporary period of time. Further, by law, SRS is a Department of Energy cleanup site, a recognition of the fact that risks that this material presents risks in general and specifically to our community. Not only has the federal government failed to provide the necessary resources to accomplish cleaning up the site, but it has repeatedly allowed shipment of additional nuclear materials to the site from both domestic and foreign sources. Given the above facts, it cannot be denied that these materials represent a multitude of risks in the Aiken community. Further, it cannot be denied that unpredictable and uncontrollable circumstances can occur that exceed the engineered safeguards of the site's facilities. The 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima Daiichi have demonstrated beyond all reasonable doubt that such circumstances can occur. Even though all the above facts point to the critical need for the establishment of a federal repository in which to safely store such dangerous material, the federal government has repeatedly failed to plan for such a repository. There is a broadly mistaken belief that Yucca Mountain was meant to be such a repository. In fact, the Department of Energy was responsible for misleading the CAB and public in that regard. This advisory board was told many times while I served as the nuclear materials chair that the high-level waste at SRS would be dispositioned to Yucca Mountain. Later, the board was told that the waste would be dispositioned to a federal repository. In fact, there has never been a plan for the storage of defense waste in a federal repository. The planning for a federal repository only involves storage of material from commercial reactors. A review of the various bills, laws, and acts passed by Congress over the years bears testament to this, and I will just share a very brief list of the history. 1954, the Atomic Energy Bill was passed, and there was some understanding at that point that the disposition of high-level radioactive waste would be the responsibility of the federal government. 1956, National Academy of Science recommended deep geologic disposal of long-lived, highly radioactive waste from nuclear reactors. 1982, Congress passed the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, establishing a repository site screening process. It specifically states that this waste will come from nuclear reactors. That's commercial waste, not defense waste. 1992, Secretary of Energy announced that the efforts of the Nuclear Waste Negotiator Office, they were set up to go around and do a consent-based thing, had failed, and they shut it down. But a strategy was needed to begin waste acceptance from the commercial reactors in 1998. 1997, House and Senate bills emphasized interim storage of spent fuel, again, commercial reactors, at a Nevada test site. Early mid-1999, House and Senate bills emphasized interim storage of spent fuel at the Nevada test site. They also, at that time, directed DOE to begin studies of transmutation technology. I know what the engineers are going to say once more. It will take too long and it will cost too much. They've been saying that for 40, 50 years while we spent billions of dollars doing nothing. Given the facts outlined above, I urge the SRS CAB to recommend that DOE immediately begin 1. The establishment of an interim repository for defense nuclear waste. 2. Research and development of transmutation technology be immediately resumed in order to provide for the ability to lower the volume, radioactive level, and half-life of the stored defense waste. With respect to the time allocated for public comment, I also did a little research. I pulled up, and there are copies back there for everyone, the Site-Specific Advisory Board Final Guidelines. And under Section 5, I would just read one sentence to you, and then I'll quit my brief remarks. Section 5 says, specifically, act as a conduit. That's what the board's responsibilities are. Act as a conduit for the exchange of information between the community, DOE, and environmental oversight agencies regarding the facilities program. And nowhere did they ever restrict the term community to just the board. Therefore, 15 minutes designated for public comment in each of these meetings is absolutely inadequate. And I ask once again to increase the amount of time given to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Gareth Fenley. I have a few short things to say. I won't get you too taxed. I'm here today because I'm a homeowner in Columbia, South Carolina. I formerly resided in Jackson, right next to the site, and I've lived within 100 miles of SRS for 11 years. I have never opposed nuclear power, and I still don't. Our communities in this area were chosen originally to provide a skilled and patriotic workforce for the defense of the United States. And I believe that choice was well made. This is one of the most patriotic and skilled areas of the population that I've ever known. We were never intended to be an international dealership for the world's most dangerous fuel and an everlasting dump for the world's most dangerous waste. I came here tonight to support your recommendation to say no to interim or long-term storage of spent fuel, high-level nuclear waste, and speaking of the decision you'll make later, to accepting spent nuclear fuel from Germany. What I'm hearing tonight is that the DOE personnel are telling us this board has no jurisdiction. We can go ahead and pass our recommendation to the larger board. It will have no effect whatsoever. I am here because I support citizen participation in policy making, and I hate public speaking, and I've never been here before. And I demand that the public, that the people here, that y'all here, participate in shaping these decisions by DOE. I have comments about the extent to which my participation was welcome tonight and allowed, and the extent to which I've had to override what several of y'all have told me to make sure that my voice is heard and that my message is received. So, since this recommendation, if you make it, will have no effect, I demand that we find out how to involve ourselves in this decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name's Laura Lance. I'm from Aiken, and I came with prepared things, but I had to kind of rework it once I reread the thing. But as someone who was born in Aiken and has lived here for almost 60 years, I'm here to tell you that the Aiken community has done its part to support America's nuclear missions. In the course of this, we inherited tons upon tons of radioactive waste and other toxic legacies, much of which has yet to be cleaned up. Enough is enough. It's time to clean up those old messes and stop inventing new missions, most of which are completely, utterly unnecessary, and which would only create more potential risk and contamination, plus more nuclear waste stranded here in Aiken. I do support the recommendation to oppose these shipments, the long-term storage of commercial spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste at SRS. My reasons are the same as they were last summer. Can y'all hear me? Okay, I can't hear myself. There's still the risk of accident or sabotage en route to Aiken with these shipments, and a lot of this is unnecessary when safer, less expensive options exist for managing these materials. And to whatever extent the lack of a permanent repository makes solutions to the nuclear waste problem seem elusive, The answer is not to kick the can down the road to Aiken, South Carolina, nor is it to generate yet more of these materials with still no place to go. For one thing, SRS, as has already been mentioned, has not been evaluated for suitability to serve as a long-term nuclear waste repository. For another, the mission to reprocess becomes the very definition of insanity, to keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results, as if some magic fairy or god out of the machine is going to arrive and fix the mess that humankind has created. We humans have no business generating yet more nuclear waste and materials when there's no path for safe disposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else?
My name is Sam Edwards. I am a co-chair of Indivisible Midlands, and I'm here closer. Okay. Ooh. I'm here to represent citizens in District 2 in solidarity with Indivisible Aiken, and we are in support of this recommendation. We oppose a nuclear wasteland in South Carolina. Enough lives have been lost here, and so we say no more lies, and no more nuclear waste. Okay, then I speak for.
Actually, it's not the public's
Okay.
time.
Anyway,
but we
I'm
already
Elaine
said-
Cooper.
Well, go
I've
right
trekked
ahead.
in from Columbia. How you doing?
Excuse me.
Um,
This is Michael McAlenis. I'm the DDFO for this. The chair is correct. This is not the period for public comment yet. The chair invited the public, if they had any questions on recommendations, to please participate. And I believe he was trying to make a comment before you interrupted him. So,
Okay, so
Larry, would you
what's
please
your
finish?
comment?
We were told not to ask questions. We
Yeah.
were told to make comments only, so that's incorrect.
Yeah.
Ma'am?
Yeah.
No.
No, we
I
were
didn't
told
say
not
that.
to
We were
make
just
it.
told not
Right.
to ask questions,
Right.
okay?
Don't
Larry-
ask questions, right?
We were told that.
Right. Right. It's on record.
Public record, you told us
Right.
not to ask questions, so what you just said is incorrect, okay?
The public comment time period is the time when you can,
After the vote.
Anyway.
What
Excuse
sense does that make, sir?
Hi, so this is
What I'm
Ms.
trying-
Spinelli. I'm the chair for the committee, and the way that we normally have our meeting set up is that we have our committee discussion with Mr. Powell had led, and we do have our discussion about our recommendations. Mr. Powell was very nice and opened it up to committee and public discussions about it. But the goal is at this point, the committee talks about each recommendation and decides if they think that there's enough validity to bring it up to the full board who ultimately makes that decision. The goal at this meeting is to solicit input from the public regarding this very specific recommendation. We do need to be concluded with this meeting by 8:20. We are only on the first of 3 recommendations, and so the goal is that we just need to make sure that these comments are brief and focused on each recommendation. And then at the end, as time permits, we have general public comments.
Thank you, Nina. And I'd like to say one other thing, too. If we get caught up on this one particular recommendation, we're going to run out of time, and we're not going to have time to go to the other recommendations. And I think that probably quite a number of the public would rather spend more time on particularly one of the other recommendations. So if you would like to finish your comment quickly, that would be fine.
Even if before I was rudely interrupted, I was going to say I'm making a brief comment, okay? So I've trekked in from Columbia, and I just live streamed, so it's also evidence on a live stream of Congressman Clyburn, and I did ask him about the MOX facility. As you know, the Obama administration and the Trump administration are not budgeting for the MOX facility at Savannah Riverside, both administrations, and I brought that up at that town hall in Sumter, and Congressman Clyburn expressed his concern and said, no worries, we won't have an interim storage facility here at Savannah Riverside. It won't happen. It'll happen at Yucca Mountain. That was his response. So I'm just not asking a question. I'm just stating what I experienced. Kind of interesting. With that said, I would like to say I would like everyone to vote no. would pass on thank you for your recommendation to vote no to interim storage over here with no exit strategy. Vote no to out-of-country nuclear waste, any and all out-of-country nuclear waste ending up at Savannah River Site. And what's up with the experimentation at Savannah River Site over these graphite balls? You know, the nuclear waste is arriving from Germany in graphite balls, and there's some talk about experimentation at Savannah River Site. What's up with that? All right, thanks.
Thank you. I think I'm going to conclude the public comment at this time and go ahead and ask if there is a motion to carry this. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
I was thinking about the public comment opportunity that you mentioned, the citing, and I'm trying to remember because you're right. There were a series of Department of Energy meetings around the country to talk about consent processes where communities would consent to become nuclear waste repositories. But I think the closest one to here was Atlanta. Is that not true? And I'm just wondering if the people in this area realized that was actually going on.
Maxine Max at DOE. I believe it was in Atlanta. They picked major cities around the country to do that, but that again was under the nuclear energy purview. We weren't
Right.
involved with that.
I'm just pointing out that I'm not sure that the citizens of Aiken or even of South Carolina were aware that that consent process probably included discussions about our state being one of the possible candidates. So.
One of the things we did do, though, Susan, was at your request, we had a nuclear energy person come and give a presentation to the CAB, I believe last December,
right.
on that whole subject.
Right. Thank you.
I think that's a wonderful idea. If we could, the folks that are in favor of this recommendation, please. You're not going to vote on anything. Oh, I'm sorry.
Show of hands.
Show of hands. The recommendation that David just went through. Everyone that's in favor of this recommendation, please raise your hand. All opposed? Thank you very much. Everyone on the board saw that, and they understand how the public feels about this. Now, do we have a motion to make a vote to take this recommendation to the full board? David, do we have a second? Earl seconds. All in favor, please raise your right hand. 6. All opposed? All, what's the word? Abstentions. Okay. So the board will take this recommendation to the full board. Thank you. Okay, David, once again, this is, we oppose the receipt of spent nuclear fuel from Germany for treatment and storage in the U.S. David, if you would...
Be happy to. I'll try and make this quick. This particular position statement was passed just last year by the board after, well, I'll just go into the background after that. In 2016, DOE issued a draft environmental assessment on a proposal to receive approximately 1 million graphite spheres of spent nuclear fuel containing approximately 900 kilograms of U.S. origin, highly enriched uranium from the Federal Republic of Germany for processing and disposition in the environmental management facilities at Savannah River Site. While the CAB has been generally supportive of EM involvement in the nuclear non-proliferation goals of the Foreign Research Reactor Spent Nuclear Fuel Return Program, the German spent nuclear fuel proposal and the EA fall short in several key areas of which the CAB has concerns. DOE has not established an adequate and compelling purpose and need for the proposal. A formal memorandum by the National Nuclear Security Administration clearly states that the German spent nuclear fuel is, quote, is not a proliferation concern, unquote. Therefore, bringing it to the U.S. for safeguarding is unnecessary. Processing the German spent nuclear fuel is unnecessary because the current physical state of the German spent fuel is very stable and substantially proliferation resistant. Germany is a wealthy and stable first world ally capable of safely and securely managing this spent nuclear fuel. 2. DOE has not identified nor evaluated all reasonable technological and siting alternatives if the spent nuclear fuel is brought to the U.S. The methods to process the German fuel are not yet fully developed, and therefore the potential environmental impacts were vaguely estimated in the draft EA. Not processing the German spent fuel is a reasonable technological alternative because the current physical form of the spent fuel is stable and amenable to long-term storage and disposal as is. Processing the German spent fuel at SRS would actually invite more environmental impacts and risk than not processing it. Therefore, the alternative of bringing it to the U.S. but not processing must be assessed. If constructing a processing facility in L area is considered a reasonable alternative rather than processing the spent fuel in H Canyon, then clearly there are other reasonable processing location alternatives than only at SRS. Discussion. While evaluating the German spent fuel proposal, it is appropriate that the CAB to consider the backdrop of other overriding environmental issues facing the SRS which are linked to management of this spent fuel. While the DOE Savannah River Operations Office and its contractors have done their best to keep commitments for cleanup and disposition of SRS materials and waste, this cannot also be said of the support received from DOE headquarters. DOE has A, failed in timely establishment of a geologic repository for the disposal of EM high-level radioactive waste and spent nuclear fuel as required by the National Nuclear Waste Policy Act, and B, consistently failed to provide sufficient resources for timely disposition of the large existing inventory of SRS spent nuclear fuel, and C, since 2004, continued to underfund and thus delay its legal SRS EM cleanup commitments, especially regarding treatment of liquid radioactive waste and closure of tanks. Such DOE failures undermine the CAB's confidence in DOE's ability for timely disposition of the German spent fuel and associated waste outside of South Carolina. Conclusions. U.S. receipt and processing of German fuel is not needed for U.S. nuclear nonproliferation goals. Therefore, the purpose and need for the proposal is lacking. All reasonable technological and siting alternatives have not been evaluated. It represents an unwarranted additional environmental risk to the citizens of the central Savannah River area. The proposal will unnecessarily add to an already large burden of indefinite spent fuel and high-level radioactive waste storage at SRS with no established path for disposal. DOE failures to faithfully keep pace with its SRS cleanup commitments impede the acceptability of this deficient proposal by the citizens of South Carolina and Georgia. Therefore, I'm proposing the recommendation. The SRS Citizen Advisory Board recommends that DOE 1. Correct the deficiencies identified in the background section above in the final environmental assessment, and 2. Prefer and select the no action alternative described in the draft environmental assessment. In other words, not receive the German spent fuel for treatment and storage in the U.S. I welcome discussion.
Dawn, go ahead.
Dawn Gillis, CAB. At least this one's EM purview. I said at least this one's in the EM purview. So as far as it we don't have a treaty that says we have to take this back, but there is, I forget what it's, what the agreement's called, that we're supposed to take back stuff.
Policy objective.
To bring back, to repatriate stuff, high-level, highly enriched uranium that went out to other countries. So there is that agreement. as far as whether it actually comes back here, now when you talk about your first one is, yes, maybe other places do need to be reviewed, okay? And I can agree with that for the first one. But you can't say the second one without having the data from the first one. You can't say, don't take the no action alternative when you don't know what the consequences are of the other actions that haven't been looked at. So, I could agree with saying go back and do more work on the environmental assessment. I could agree with that. I can't agree with saying don't do the no action one without having that data.
Any other board members with any other comments or questions for David? I think that, basically.
Susan has one.
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan, go ahead.
We had an agreement in Paris too, but that,
Yeah, tell me about it.
I just generally think that if it doesn't have to come here, we shouldn't take it. If there are other alternatives, because again, it's like the camel's head in the tent. Now we've got stuff being flown over in an airplane from Scotland, which is crazy in and of itself. It sends the signal that we are open to taking the world's radioactive garbage. And we have gone way beyond our national duty. And it's time to shut down that and clean up the mess we've got here and let other people become responsible for this waste that they're generating. And they're using either for their defense or for they're making electricity from it. So I don't think this is one of those cases where there's no proliferation risk, and it just doesn't make any. It's just opening up the door even wider. If we take this, I guess my question is, what won't we take? If we'll take this, what won't we get brought here? So I say no to this, and I think the public agrees. People just don't want more unnecessary waste being brought to Savannah River site, and it's going to add to the waste burden here, and that's what we're all trying to get rid of. And there's no clear place for it to go.
So when you say no to this, you say yes
I
to
say
the
yes to the recommendation.
Okay,
Yes.
thank
Yes
you.
to the recommendation.
All right. Anyone else on the board? Cautiously, I say, is there anyone from the public that would like to make a quick comment? Joe.
Joe Ortalo, the public. I'm going to say something I've said before. I think most of you have heard that before. And David did a great job writing this up. He raises a lot of questions that have to be answered before a decision can be made one way or the other. I mean, first of all, I think we don't know whether this is a non-proliferation issue or not. The statement on that is a footnote in here. Anyway, it's dated 2013, I believe, August 1st, 2013. Well, since then, because of the agreement to bring back all the atoms for peace material, somebody somewhere in Germany or the United States started this whole thing going. Savannah River National Laboratory has been working on this issue. Until they get their answer, whether this stuff is recoverable or not, we don't really know whether it's a proliferation issue or not. So I think we can't really make that statement, and the CAB shouldn't take that position until we know it is. I think the CAB can pass something, but I think it ought to be not on the tones of saying, don't accept this, we recommend that we not accept it, but say that we had to have all these issues addressed and answered before a position can be taken. You're just prematurely taking a position, in my opinion. I mean, the site, I think everybody in this room agrees that the site has a lot of unique features that can only be done here in the world, in the United States, and no other place in the world. And I think we all agree we don't want to bring anything into the site that's going to stay here permanently. But we don't have the information to make those decisions right now yet. Get all these questions answered, have DOE communicate with you to give you the information that you're asking for, and then make your final position. You got to make a recommendation now, make it to say that we cannot, the board cannot recommend we take it or we not take it until all these things are issued. That's my 2 cents on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Maira Warshauer. I came down from Columbia, a member of the public. I was very convinced by the board's position, and I was concerned when the last gentleman mentioned something about reprocessing, because I was relieved when I read that these graphite balls are stable and they're not a proliferation risk. Why would we want to even contemplate a procedure that would generate more waste in terms of an experimental an effort to reprocess something that is already stable? I'm totally against taking the waste from Germany. As you mentioned, it's not a risk, and it was stated by, I think it was the DOE itself, if I'm not mistaken, that it was not a proliferation risk. I don't want to have it happen. And I know that a lot of people that couldn't come tonight feel the same way. Thank you so much for your concerns.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks. I'm Sarah Cohen. I'm from the Conservation Voters of South Carolina. So I'm going to read a letter that our Executive Director, John Tynan, wrote. He's not able to be here tonight, so I'll read it in his stead. And also, this is a bit of a personal issue to me. I'm from Aiken County, and 3 generations of my family have worked at SRS, so it's a little bit of a personal issue for me as well. So I'll just read the letter. To whom it may concern, Conservation Voters of South Carolina opposes any proposal to receive the German spent nuclear fuel at the Savannah River site in Aiken County. South Carolina must reject the idea of storing any additional radioactive waste at SRS. South Carolina took more than its fair share of nuclear waste when 99% of the state's most radioactive, commercial, low-level waste was buried at the nearby Barnwell site before the site's use was restricted in 2008. Most radioactive waste was imported to South Carolina, whether from the United States or other countries, and it means that more risk to our state and our drinking water. Already, there are millions of gallons of highly radioactive liquid waste waiting at SRS to be vilified or solidified to a safer state. Completing this task could take at least 20 years if the federal government fully funded it. Years ago, Governor Riley stated the rule about nuclear waste: it stays where it's put. Importing international radioactive waste would revive our state's reputation as the pay toilet for our nation and now the world. In poll after poll, South Carolinians say the nuclear waste should not be a growth industry for our state. Our position is straightforward. CVSC opposes any action which would cause South Carolina to be used as a nuclear waste dump for other countries. Specifically, we oppose the receipt of German SNF for the following reasons. U.S. receipt and processing of the German SNF is not needed for U.S. nuclear nonproliferation and risk reduction goals. All reasonable technological and sitting alternatives have not been evaluated. The environmental effects of potential German SNF receipt represent an unwarranted additional environmental risk to citizens in the central Savannah River area. The receipt of German SNF will unnecessarily add to an already large burden of indefinite SNF and high-level radioactive waste storage at SRS with no established path for disposal. The Department of Energy's failure to faithfully keep pace with its SRS cleanup commitment suggests it will not be able to sufficiently manage and clean up any German SNF at the SRS site. CVSC will continue to advocate against more nuclear waste storage at SRS and everywhere else in South Carolina. I have a copy of the letter. I don't know. I'm supposed to give it to somebody. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Gareth Fenley again. I would rather not speak again. I don't like speaking. I did want to bring up one point specific to this issue that hasn't been mentioned yet, regarding the involvement of the private sector. No one has spoken to this, but it's my understanding that big corporations are involved in this venture to ship the waste in from Germany. I'm calling it waste because I'm just a member of the public, and to me spent fuel is waste, and what they kind of want to do, I understand it's not according to the jargon. I'm a member of the public. To me, what's happening is recycling. They're bringing in something, they're going to take it apart and keep some of it that's good, and the rest is going to be more concentrated waste. So they claim they can do this, and they'll sell it for profit, and whatever they can't stays permanently here. Now, if I have this wrong, let me know, but it's my understanding that private corporations are part of this proposal. If they're not, let me know. I passed this letter by some other people who seem to think it was right. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll take one more comment, and I think we'll do what we did last time.
No, please, I defer to Suzanne.
Well, I think they could stand a new voice. But at the previous committee meeting, I mentioned that I have a lot of respect for the technical skills here at this lab, which I think is foremost in its field. But let's face it, we've been working on this for what, 3-4 years, and we still don't know if these things should be separated. Proliferation is not an issue. Germany, France, and the UK have got to get their act together. They all have a lot of reactors. They have a lot of waste. Some of it, a little tiny bit of the European stuff came from Atoms for Peace type stuff. We probably should get that back. But the commercial waste, they've got to get their act together. I'm proud of what's happened in this country so far, except for the Durham repository, which we've got to make some progress on. But thank you very much. I support the resolution.
Thank you. We've got time for one more. Yeah.
I appreciate this opportunity. My name is Pamela Greenlaw. I am a member of the public, obviously. I know that your recommendation is based upon technological and, technological reasons and so on. It's very well written. I have a different angle here, and it fits with what Gareth was bringing up, and that is that my understanding, and this is, you said no question, but I do need to ask this, maybe somebody could elucidate. Germany has offered to pay, if I'm correct, for their waste to come here. And my question is, for how many years will they pay for us to try to deal with this? And at what point will they say, we're finished, and I have to start paying for it? And I'm already paying for the disposal of the legacy wastes that are supposed to be taken care of. So we really, I understand why you didn't put in the financial thing, but it's something we really need to consider. This shouldn't be about making money or counting on someone else to, I like that toilet analogy, because I was saying in the car on the way down, if I give a kid a sandwich on the other end of the sandbox and it goes through him, he can't hand me back what comes out of the other end of him for me to take care of. On this earth, we are all in the same sandbox. And if they need to take care of their end, and I'm going to take care of mine, and I really think that is a security issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michael. I'm sorry. Let me just ask Michael. Michael, am I really out of order when we do this vote from the public back there? It just seems to me that
Mike
expedient.
McElwain, Stewie. I thought that was there's a lot of public interest. There's a lot of public passion on it. We haven't had an act like that before, and I thought that was a really good way to get them engaged, because we'd be here for 4 hours tonight if we gave everybody an opportunity to talk on each of the recommendations, and we do want it. And if I miscommunicated with you earlier, if let's assume we had the 3 recommendations, 30-minute budgeted time for each. If the CAB's deliberations on the recommendation was done in 20, you could have opened it up for. We didn't really want to have public comments, but if they had a question, David, what do you mean by this, or what do you mean by that, and wanted to have a dialogue from here, that's what we could have done there. So if there was a miscommunication on my part to you for that, I apologize. But I think getting the show of the hands really gave everybody a chance to show exactly what their position was and could communicate it to the board, which gives them a lot of opportunity.
Thank you.
I thought that was good.
Larry, may I just draw your attention to another of the site-specific final advisory board guidelines? It says that as long as...
Rose, we had a question from our board first.
Oh, okay.
We've got 2 questions from the board
Let me just
first.
leave this with you, because I don't think you have a copy of
Okay.
your own guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
That's the old one, isn't it? Yeah.
Go ahead with your question.
My name is Doug Howard. I'm one of the new board members, and I don't have the experience or the research to really make a wise decision on this, but this is almost common sense here. We do know some facts. The facts are this is a stable material, right? Stable, and it will cause no harm to anyone. So why would we be taking this in when Germany can take care of it itself? I mean, it makes no sense. I mean, it's a common sense question to me. You know, why would we take something in when they could take care of it
That's
themselves?
part of our recommendation.
Part of the only reason that it's being considered at all is because it's U.S. origin material, and there was the old agreement that way back we gave highly enriched uranium to a lot of countries all around the world, and through the non-proliferation and what was it, global threat reduction, and all of that, the idea was that the U.S. take all of that highly enriched uranium back in, and for places that use this for research reactor fuel, it was replaced with low enriched uranium, and so this was an experimental fuel form that Germany did using U.S. origin highly enriched uranium, and so it is research reactor fuel and U.S. origin, and that's why it was supposed to come back here under that agreement.
So we do have a record on file that says that we are supposed to receive that back.
It's kind of a gentleman's agreement. And it was also, it was made, it was also made during the Atoms for Peace, which was a long, long time ago, before Germany became the powerhouse of the world like it is, with all the high-tech country that it is. So, yeah, I mean, it's something that we kind of agreed to 40 years ago, 50 years ago.
It's not legally binding.
Right, it's not legally binding. The comment I just wanted to make is that I know some of you are new, and I wanted to remind everybody that there was a public program on this last year, but I think it was last year, at the community center here, and the whole big presentation was made on why this is being considered and the technical aspects of it and everything, and there was a large public turnout. I would say there were over 100 people there. It filled the room. And afterwards, people were allowed 3 minutes to make comments, and it was just everybody from around the Aiken, greater area. And I would say the large majority of people that spoke were opposed to this plan. So in terms of public input, it was presented, and it was an excellent presentation. It answered a lot of questions about how we got into this and why it was being considered and everything. Nonetheless, the public that was there, which were mainly citizens of Aiken, overwhelmingly said, thank you, but no thank you. So just wanted to remind that we did have this public discussion.
Thank you, Susan.
Question of stability, I mean, the initial work SRNL has done is that they can extract the initial work on your question about stability and the non-proliferation part about getting the enriched uranium out of this, which is what the Atom for Peace initial driver was all about. The initial work that SRNL has done is saying that you may be able to extract this enriched uranium-238. And that's the non-proliferation part. If you can get this out, then it can be a non-proliferation issue. And they just don't have those answers yet. And
that's the proliferation risk, is developing the process.
Right. And that's what the Germans were paying SRNL to do. And the initial results were that, yes, you can do this. They didn't say for sure. But that's a question you guys ought to be asking. What's the status of those studies before you take this stance that you shouldn't do it? You don't have all the information. It's not ready to go by any means, but on the other hand, you need more information to find out whether you can make the recommendation.
Okay. Thank you, Joel. David, did you have another comment?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. In the environmental assessment that I talk about in this recommendation, they make clear that DOE has a choice to make in terms of whether to receive this material back. DOE has what they call a policy objective of returning highly enriched uranium to the United States when it presents a proliferation concern. That's the thing about this particular fuel. DOE itself has admitted that it is not a proliferation concern. Generally, I support getting that stuff back when it is a proliferation concern. But when DOE itself admits that this spent fuel is not a proliferation concern, and I agree with you, it just doesn't make sense. That's all.
Thank you, David. Earl, do you have another comment, question?
No, I don't want to add to your time. I was just going to make a statement. So we good.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, since I've been given permission, we'll go ahead and let the public have a show of hands on whether or not they think we should pass this recommendation. All those in favor? All those opposed? All those abstaining? Thank you. Okay, do we have a motion to take this recommendation to the full board for a vote? David makes a motion. Do we have a second? Earl seconds. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 5. All those opposed? All those in the middle of the road? 2. Okay. Thank you very much. We've got a recommendation draft from Nina about the drone spotting over SRS. Nina, would you like to go over that?
No, that's next week.
Oh, okay.
Close enough. Not ready for that one quite yet. I'm gonna wait until David's on the other side of the room from me. I did take your copy, sorry. I have another one, I'm sure. This recommendation is very simple, and I don't think anyone on this committee, I'm gonna wait a second until, we're good? Okay, so I don't think any of us are gonna be surprised by this. We've had a recommendation similar to this in July of last year, and I'm not going to read it to you in its entirety because there are copies and it is on the screen, but the background just goes over H Canyon. The second paragraph just discusses the current status of L Basin. The third paragraph, I think, is more relevant to the actual recommendation. The fuel is being safely stored in L Basin. Safeguards are in place to ensure the safety of the fuel stored in the basin. H Canyon is continuing to process the spent nuclear fuel under the current record of decision. However, a departmental decision from the Department of Energy is needed for the future of spent nuclear fuel. One of the highlights of the first sentence in the background, which I think is important, is that H Canyon is the only hardened nuclear chemical separations plant still in operations in the United States. Without H Canyon, the United States would have less capabilities than many developing countries in processing fuel. I have gotten some feedback from recommendations and just some wordsmithing, but essentially the recommendations are just two. One, that the CAB continue to recognize the value and uniqueness of H Canyon and advocate for the fullest level of funding to ensure that the canyon remains fully operational and can continue processing spent nuclear fuel. Second, release a decision on spent nuclear fuel. While the community surrounding the site believes the site can safely store the fuel, the SRS CAB believes that H Canyon is able to process fuel and use that output productively. Additionally, storage space is limited and the site is not intended to be a permanent repository. Processing the fuel allows more of the material to leave the site boundaries and offers the opportunity for H Canyon, the only canyon of its design in the country, to use its full capabilities.
Thank you, Dana. Any comments on this? David?
Yeah.
David Hoyle, CAB. Over the years, the CAB has many times weighed in on the topic of utilization of H Canyon. And in fact, I believe Congress, in their wisdom, passed a law that says that we've got to keep H Canyon active because it is our only facility for this sort of work. We have a lot of spent fuel stored in L Basin, as this recommendation states. Most of it is aluminum-clad spent nuclear fuel. Aluminum-clad fuel was made for one purpose, and that is to be reprocessed. It's not intended to be stored for a long time because aluminum isn't a good cladding for that purpose. It was always intended to be processed through H Canyon, and frankly, I'm worried that if we don't get it processed through H Canyon soon, they're going to shut down H Canyon for wanting to save money, and that spent fuel will stay on our hands forever. And it's not intended to be disposed of in a geologic repository is not intended to be stored for a long time. It needs to be reprocessed. That's my opinion.
Good
Thank
Does
you,
that
David.
opinion go with it? Like, do you like?
I'm for this recommendation.
I think you should say it again.
I'm for this recommendation.
Don?
Those are all very good points, and that's one thing that I don't think we've ever actually brought up, the fact that aluminum fuel was designed specifically to process and recover what needed to be
Can
recovered.
you say that slower so we can, do you think that we should put that in the background? Or do
That's
you think
probably
it's
not a bad idea to put a
unnecessary?
sentence in there about that.
Can we do that, the third paragraph of note where it talks about the budget, maybe the sentence before that?
I don't have it in front of me, no.
And then if you just want to add that sentence about the aluminum clad.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that the basin chemistry has to be kept so perfect too, and it is kept very perfect just because of that.
Okay, so make a sentence that you think would fit.
All right, I have to. Can I do this after we're done here?
You were saying it though, the aluminum clad.
But I have to figure out where it has to go in here.
Okay, but so just adding that piece about the aluminum clad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So that was it.
Thank you, Don. My comment, Nina, is H Canyon, it's age, and I think that we should maybe put a third budget, a third recommendation that they budget more for maintenance and improvements to the canyon. Because, on our tours of the canyon, we're seeing a lot of old style dials and parts, and they're right alongside brand new digital readouts and that sort of thing. So I just think we should encourage them to budget in more for maintenance and improvements.
Perfect. I'll add a number 3. Is everyone good with that? Comfortable with it? Thank you, Larry. And
Any
Don,
other
how do you feel
comments?
about that sentence?
Where it needs to go.
Can I ask a question? It never says defense spent fuel. To me, this opens the door for commercial spent fuel to come here. And I think that ought to be clarified. I think there's a lot of concern here. It opens the door for commercial spent fuel.
The aluminum clad fuel, the commercial fuel is not aluminum clad, and the canyon.
I'm not into aluminum. I'm into the fact that it doesn't describe it as defense spent fuel. If someone wanted to use this, they could justify commercial spent fuel.
Okay, it's not defense in that there is a lot of research reactor. We get stuff from universities that's not defense, but it is not commercial. So I mean, I guess you could add something there that says not commercial, but we can't say defense because there's a lot. There's MIT has fuel that comes here. So aluminum clad fuel or aluminum based fuel. It's not necessarily clad. It's aluminum based fuel, because in fact I don't even think. Right now, we don't have any agreements to bring in anything but aluminum based. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So any research reactor that's not aluminum based doesn't even come here because we can only process aluminum based here at Savannah River Site.
Well, we could work on that together. When you make your sentence about aluminum clad, we could probably work that piece into it.
Yeah. I don't work under pressure this way on this stuff.
You can email me.
I'll work on it and just send it to you.
Yeah,
So we know the context of what it is.
Yeah.
Just
accept it in the draft.
Yeah, and before it goes to full board.
Okay.
Well, do we have a motion?
A second.
Okay. We're ready to vote on this recommendation. Okay. Are there any public input on this recommendation?
I have some comments. Back in the day, hi, Rose Hayes again. Back in the day when Don Bridges was chairing and Joe was always here with his infinite wisdom and a lot of other people that had a lot of experience working at SRS, the issue came up, the government wanted to either shut down H Canyon or take it down to MnSafe. we made a recommendation, put it forward, and one of the things that we advised the DOE on was that it is so old at H Canyon that if it ever is taken down, even the min save, it probably can never be brought back up to code. Therefore, we definitely need for the government to put on a priority list of some sort, upgrading H Canyon. At a time it was going to become obsolete. Now it seems to be the answer to everything. Well, if it's the answer to everything, it's got to be brought back up to, or upgraded to some sort of modern capacity, because it definitely isn't. We haven't made that kind of changes to it since they wanted to shut it down.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rose.
Looking at a number 4.
Well, that, I think that had a lot to say about the number 3.
In the budget.
For maintenance and improvements. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none. David, would you like to make a motion?
I thought you were going to do a show of hands again.
I think we'll pass on that one this time. Do we have a motion to We're already there. Okay, I'm sorry. All those in favor of the recommendation, please show a right hand.
Going to the next level.
And all those opposed? All those neither? One. Okay. Okay, we got 3 recommendations going to the full board at our next meeting. Does anyone else have any comments at the board for the committee? If we don't, then I guess we're ready for public comment. Does anyone?
Just very briefly, Tom Clement, Savannah Riverside Watch. As you're probably aware, former Governor Haley had pretty much made statements to the media that she was against more nuclear waste coming to Savannah Riverside. So I just want to read this very brief letter from Governor McMaster, which I wrote him about receiving waste here and also the mixed oxide fuel fabrication facility. So it's only 2 sentences. Thank you for your recent correspondence regarding the mixed oxide fuel fabrication facility at Savannah Riverside in South Carolina. And this is what I wanted to underscore. I will continue to stand against any action to make South Carolina a dumping ground for nuclear waste, and I remain committed to ensuring the U.S. Department of Energy fulfills its legal obligation to the state of South Carolina. I will continue work on behalf of our state to resolve this issue. So I just wanted this to go into the cab record that the governor had at least expressed some opinion about more nuclear waste coming into the site. So that's all. Thank you. I'll just leave that from there.
Thank you, Tom.
If you'll pass that, James, it'll get in the record.
Anyone else?
It has to do with mosques and nothing you're reading in the newspaper about it, something to do with it, and the magic over does put in it. Just remember when I had the Yucca Mountain, I mean, that was right on the verge of starting and then it shut down. And believe me, there's a heck of a lot more questions associated with the WIP relative to us taking the material that we're sending with it instead of sending the mosques.